So now I would like to show you a few variations on trimming T-bowls. We'll be working with a couple of shapes, this cylinder shape that you've seen me throw, and there's a look at the foot of the T-bowl. This is the part that we'll be trimming now. We'll go from the piece that we threw and carve out the finished part, which is this area, this foot. And you can see that the foot is asymmetrical. It's slightly larger than 1/3 of the size of the piece for proportion. And this asymmetry and this gestural quality and a little bit of cut textures, all of these qualities that you see in here are valued as part of the expression of the piece. The idea that a bowl has a certain quality, you notice that asymmetry keeps your eye moving around the piece. And so this is a very important part of the trimming of the T-bowl. So this is a very important part of the making of the T-bowl. I would say that the actual trimming of the foot is more important. Here's the funnel-shaped T-bowl that you saw me throw. And this creation of the foot is probably more important than the actual throwing of the form. It's all important, the form, the foot, and the finished firing. You've got to have all those things come together in order to make a successful T-bowl. So hopefully this will be one of those, but or every T-bowl, never gets completely determined until it's actually made. So I'm going to trim a few and show you how we go about trimming those bowls. But the other thing to realize is everything you see, to some degree, is an attempt to give the impression that the bowl was hand-built, or handmade, or that it's a hand process that trims the bowl. So that's what we'll be working on here. So we'll start with the funnel shape. And here's the shape that we'll work with. And the clay, what you want it stiff enough at the top that it'll support the weight when you turn it over. You want it stiff here, but you want it to be soft enough here for a wooden tool to cut and push the clay. But this work here is just a little bit dry. So we'll still be able to work with it, I think, but it's not ideal. So as you work with this, you do want to try to catch this clay on the foot at a relatively soft stage. And so now the first step, actually, just to go over, I want to check how much clay do I have right here in the center, how much clay do I have out here, how much clay do I have right here. So I get a real clear idea of what I'm going to trim away. And then I center the clay. And it's really close now. I'm just micro tuning here. And take a little roll of clay, and you want to pin it down pretty well, just because when we do the cut out of the center, you'll see that it actually puts a lot of torque on the bowl. And so you want to make sure that the bowl is really held down well. And this particular style of bowl, especially when the clay is stiff, calls for a fairly symmetrical beginning where the wheel is moving rather rapidly. So initially, what I'm doing is I'm just trimming the clay very close to the same shape as the bottom of the bowl. And what I'm looking for as I go is this proportion here. I want to make sure that this doesn't stay too big and it doesn't get too small. And then when I get that right proportion, then I bring it down so that there's a clear outside of the foot, and then a section that becomes the body of the T-bowl. Now here, if I like the way I've got that, if there's some markings here that are nice, I can leave that, or I can work with it further. I can show you some examples of that. And then to carve out the inside, now this is a tool that I make. It's a cheap grocery store bamboo spatula. And I've sanded the bottom part here so that it curves upward. And then the edge here is very sharp. But it will dull over time, and it actually gets better if it dulls a little bit. And same with this end. This is the end I'll be using for the inside. This is the inside tool. And the important part of this one is that you can see it's on the underside, it's curved upward. And then it's a sharp edge here, and it's a sharp edge here. And these are both cutting edges. And this particular part here, I want to have this forward because it's going to actually be leading my tool as I trim. And what you'll see here is that this, the clay is spinning this way, it's moving this way around, and I'm going to actually dig into the clay. So I have to really hold my tool so it doesn't actually dig right through the bottom of the T-bowl. So that's very important as we work, that I don't dig right through the bottom of the piece. And I'm just watching to make sure that I get a thin enough rim on the clay. Now, if this clay were a little bit softer, and that's looking pretty good, but I want to thin this part out a little bit. So I'm just going to keep cutting just a little bit more to thin this section out just a little bit. If the clay was softer, it would actually move and spread, and that's really desirable if you can make that happen. I'm just going to thin this out just a little bit more. And that's looking pretty good. Maybe getting about as far as we can go with that. I might just come in here and work this section a little bit. So I'm looking for a kind of gestural mark and also a removal of enough clay for the whole process, for the bowl itself. So that's what I'm looking for here. So, and that gives you an idea of what how to trim the foot there. And I'll sign it and we'll take a look at it. It's got a little bit of bits of clay, and we'll just sign it right. I'll just do a little signature. And my signature is my first initial, the M, and then the L is just shooting off across the piece. And in a wood-fired T-bowl or even a glazed bowl, that becomes a nice feature in the design of the bowl. So there's a foot on that piece. You can see there, get a little closer, and then when you see it here, you can kind of get a sense of how it stands visually. So that's one bowl. Let's try another of that form before we move on to the next shape. I want to find one with just a little bit wetter clay. This one feels, well, it might be a little wetter. That would be good. A little damper clay. Yeah. Let's try that. And again, I'm going to start with feeling the thickness here and here. And then I will center the clay. So the Japanese talk about, one of my favorite expressions is that you can judge the character of the potter, or at least the emotional state of the potter, by the foot that they trim. In this case, one of the things that an experienced person might notice, boy, these feet were trimmed when the clay was a little bit hard, which might indicate that this potter was a little distracted, perhaps multitasking, perhaps making an instructional video instead of focusing completely on trimming the bowls and getting them to the right wetness. But you'll learn all of those things from experience. But if you're afraid of digging through the clay, if you're afraid of punching through, that fear will manifest in a thicker, the bowl will be thicker. So now I'm going to start trimming the outside and carving that again, and I'm going to follow the shape of the bowl. I'm going to cut down to the shape of the bowl initially, as I did with the first one. And you can see we're just taking a lot of clay off quickly, and that actually was maybe a little too quick. And you can see that I broke out of my my hold there, which is fine. I can just go ahead and put it back in. But I remove a lot of clay quickly initially because I'm just getting down to shaping the outside. The first thing I do is shape the outside. The role of the tea bowl in the tea ceremony is, for me, it's what excites me about making these is that you're making a very important, in fact, probably one of the most important aspects of the tea ceremony. This is the expression of the beauty embodied in the philosophy of tea, the wabi-sabi spirit, the asymmetry, the color markings of the firing, the gestural quality of the carving, all of these things are going into creating a form that is going to be in the hands of the tea guest. And when the tea guest is there, the tea guest is striving to become present in the moment. I don't know if striving or just their practice is to become very present in the moment and aware of the beauty of the moment and the beauty around them and the good company. And so that's the action, that's the role of tea in your life, is to give you that experience. And so having that experience, when your goal is to become aware in the present moment of beauty, one of the great talismans, one of the great conduits to beauty is the tea bowl that's sitting in your hand. So again, now I'm going to go from the inside and I'm going to cut towards the outside into the clay as it turns. I'm cutting in the direction that the clay is turning. And that's how we make our tea, our foot for a tea bowl. I'll just soften the edge there. Makes it a little smoother to the touch. And sometimes I do that, sometimes not, but that's a really nice, that's an effective a foot for the tea bowl. And then what I'll do now is just sign it and show it to you a little closer. We'll get up close on that. And the bowl is lighter. You can see the whole form of the bowl now is finished and realized. And there's the foot that we carved. And I'll get a little closer there so you can see that. And so that's the funnel form. Let's take a look at the cylinder form, which is a slightly different process. And I do this in several different ways. I'm going to demonstrate one of them now. And we'll get one of these forms that we can work with. Here's a rather tall shape, see, and it's a cylinder shape. And you can feel in here that the actual thickness of the clay on the outside is this thick, and then it gets quite narrow in the middle. So this will give us an idea of what we have to work with. And you can see that because of the undulation of the lip here undulates quite a bit, which is desirable. But when you flip it over to trim it, you can see that, well, that's a little bit of a kind of a interesting challenge, but not really. What I do is I take just a little bit of clay and I make a wedge, just a little wedge shape. And I just tip it level and I just drop that wedge shape in there. And I don't push it down too much because I'm going to need to slide it into center. Let's see, get this back up. A little technical difficulty, knocked my microphone over. Okay, so now this is a whole different kind of shape, and this is where you'll see even more of my effort to make it look a bit like it's hand carved. It actually will be hand carved, but I will use the speed of the wheel initially to get rid of a lot. There's a lot of excess clay in the foot because when we're throwing it, you saw this in the throwing demo, in order to make the vertical walls and to manipulate them, and you see me extruding them through my hands when I'm throwing it, the way I really squeeze the clay and drag the clay, it requires a lot of support down here or it would collapse. So there's, and the inside of this is curved, but I've taken clay all the way almost out to the end, and that means that there's a lot of clay in there to be removed. So this starts out as a 2-pound ball of clay, and by the time we're done, it'll be about a pound or a pound and a quarter in weight by the time we trim it down. So the first step looks a little bit like, it looks a little bit like what you saw with the funnel shape. We're just going to trim it down. And I'm going to trim off a lot of the excess clay. And at the same time, I have an eye towards the center. I want that center here to be the right proportion, a little bit, just a slight bit more than a third. And then, now that's the start, and it's just basically the beginning of the shaping of the foot. And what I'm going to do now is you'll see I'm actually am kind of hand carving. I'm carving away sections, and the wheel is turning very slowly just to get me a new angle on it, but it's not really spinning in order to get a symmetrical kind of effect. We're really definitely trying to get an asymmetrical trim. And you can see me digging in with that tool to create an edge of the foot there. And that's the beginning of creating what feels like a foot that I can enjoy during tea ceremony. So that's what we're working on here, is just carving a free and expressive foot. And you can see that I'm not interested in getting a round foot here, but I'm really interested, there'll be some straight edges and some interrupted curves and just a creation of the foot itself. And then, and this clay is a little bit softer, which is just what we're looking for. And then I'll use the inside tool again, and I'll come in and I will just trim just so I have enough thickness on the outside to make a good gesture of foot there. And that's a fine foot. That's a nice delicate foot. And I'll sign that, and we can look at that. And you get a sense of, it's quite a bit lighter now. And if you look up there, look at it, there's a foot, and you can see it's not quite round. Your eyes are never allowed to really settle and understand the shape. The shape is more complicated and gestural, and it will add some intrigue when people are in the tea ceremony and they're appreciating the bowl. After they finish drinking, there's always a time when they have the bowl in their hand and they can appreciate the beauty of the bowl. So we've looked at the trimming of a funnel shape and of a cylinder shape, and that gives you a little bit of idea. That gives you a start into what is a long adventure in learning and finding your own way through trimming a tea bowl, because it is a very personal expression, and you will find your own.